Welcome to the Audio Fundamentals course, episode 7. Today we're going to look at equalization, or EQ. So the first question to ask is, what is equalization? We'll look at that, and then we'll explore some common types of equalizers and look at filters and the types of filters there are and the parameters involved in those. So what is equalization? An equalizer is basically a set of volume controls for certain collections of partials at different areas on the frequency spectrum. They can be less specific or more specific. For example, you could target all the high end or just a certain area near, say, 8 kilohertz. EQ is not a demixer. It can't extract instruments or vocals. A future video will explore that, different ways of trying to extract instruments or vocals from a finished mix, but in general, it's kind of like trying to take all of the egg out of a cake that you buy at the store. It's very difficult and often impossible. Since most sounds contain a variety of frequencies, being able to balance the partials in different frequency ranges helps change the tone to match other stuff that you have going on in your recording. Now, last time we looked briefly at an equalization graph. Let's quickly review that. So here we have the graph, and on the x-axis we've got frequency from low to high. Anything in the middle is unity gain. That's just going to leave the amplitude of those partials alone. As you go up, it increases the amplitude, and down it decreases the amplitude. So let's listen to what happens when you use various types of filtering on a track that has several different instruments in it. First, here's the example track that we're using. Now, if we were to reduce the treble, the higher frequencies, you'd get a sound something like this. Likewise, if we reduce the bass frequencies, you get this kind of a sound. Now, obviously, there's various degrees and amounts that you can reduce the treble or bass, and there's various points that you can set those curves to be at. We also need to look at two other things that you can do with filters. One is to reduce the mid-range, the area between treble and bass. One example of that sounds like this. We can also increase the mid-range, which sounds something like this. And obviously this is a very simplified view, but these are the basic things that you would do with sounds using equalization. Let's take a quick look at the types of equalizers that there are in the analog domain. There's two main types that you'll encounter. One is the graphic equalizer, which divides the frequency range into equal sections. Each of these sections on a graphic equalizer is known as a band, so you'll find 15 band, 31 band, and so on. The 31 bands are usually called third octave graphic equalizers. They get their name because you can set a curve graphically. If you'll notice where the sliders are on this graphic equalizer, they form a curve something like this, and that's approximately what you would get for the EQ curve. The other main type of equalizer is the parametric equalizer. Instead of dividing the frequency range into sections, you get a set of filters or sound shapers, and each one of those has options for what frequency you want it to affect and how much you want to boost or attenuate the sound. At least for an analog parametric EQ, it takes a lot of thought to imagine what the EQ curve must be. Thankfully, we're going to be using mostly digital equalizers, which will usually draw the graph for you on screen. While you could use either type of equalizer for many different tasks, there tend to be some patterns as far as when people use them for different purposes. Each type of equalizer has different strengths. For example, the graphic equalizer is easier to get the hang of quickly and to make overall adjustments. So one of the most common purposes that it's put to use for is for live sound, where it's used to adjust the overall mix of everything coming out of the speakers. A parametric equalizer tends to be more useful for shaping individual tracks in a mix. Even on very basic mixers, you'll usually find some sort of simplified parametric equalizer in the form of the mid-range control. More complicated parametric equalizers, such as those on a digital audio workstation, feature filters, or the sound shapers we were talking about a moment ago. Different types of filters have different parameters or settings, and we'll look at the different types of filters and the different settings they each have. So filters are just what they sound like. They let some things through and hold back other things. The main types you'll find are the high-pass and low-pass filter, the high-shelf and low-shelf filter, the band-pass and band-reject filters, and the most common for a parametric equalizer, the peaking and dipping filter. High-pass and low-pass filters are mirror images of each other. The high-pass filter lets the high frequencies pass through and cuts the lows out. The low-pass filter is just the reverse. Here's what the graphs look like. A high-pass filter lets the highs pass through at unity gain, and as you go lower in frequency, it attenuates the signal more and more. Likewise, low-pass filter lets the lows through at unity gain, and as you go higher and higher in frequency, the signal's attenuated more and more. It's important to remember that the high-pass and low-pass filters are named based on which frequencies they let through at unity gain. That's quite different from these next two filters, the high-shelf and low-shelf filters. These filters are named after which frequencies they affect. So the high-shelf filter boosts or cuts everything above a point that you specify. It looks like this. Below the point that you specify, the filter remains at unity gain for those partials. You get to set a point where, as you go higher in frequency above that point, the signal is boosted or attenuated based on how you set the filter. So this example, we're cutting frequencies above the point. But notice that that's different from a low-pass filter because the frequencies are let through above that point at a constant level, let's say -3 decibels of gain. The low-shelf filter is a mirror image of the high-shelf filter. So you get to set a point where everything above it is let through at unity gain, and around that point, the gain changes so that below it, everything is boosted or attenuated by the amount that you set. The next two filters are less commonly used. They're the band pass and band reject. The term band tends to mean a range of frequencies. So as you can see, we're reusing some of the same terms and the same words in the names of these filters. A band pass filter lets through the band you choose and cuts out everything else. The band reject filter cuts the band that you're focusing on and lets everything else through. The graphs of those look like this. So there's a narrow range that you can let through at unity gain, and as you go higher or lower than that point, it becomes more and more attenuated. The band reject filter is the opposite. As you get near a certain frequency, the attenuation approaches infinity. The next type of filter is the peak and dip filter, and that's the most common filter that you'll find in a parametric equalizer. The graph looks like this for a dip or a peak. Here are the types of filter parameters you'll find for each of those filters. A parametric equalizer, the word comes from the same root as parameters. So you've got frequency on all those types of filters. On the peaking and dipping filters, you've got bandwidth or Q. Q stands for quality, but not quality as in how good it is, rather just quality as in how narrow or wide the filter is. Instead of bandwidth or Q, you usually get a slope parameter on a high-pass or a low-pass filter. On both the peaking and dipping filters and the shelf filters, you'll have a gain control. And if you recall, gain can be positive or negative, so that gives you a lot of options for shaping the sound. Thanks a lot for watching. As usual, feel free to leave comments or questions, and I encourage you to subscribe or mark the video as a favorite. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.